The crystal champagne flute shattered against marble, echoing through the winter gala like a gunshot. Every head turned toward the Duchess Eleanor Vale. Porcelain face finally cracked, voice trembling with years of swallowed silence. "Tell them," she demanded, her words slicing through string quartet melodies. "Tell them about her." Duke Adrian's practiced smile faltered. Around them, 300 aristocrats held their breath, watching perfection implode in real time. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not to them. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you want to see how the most envied marriage in high society collapsed in one devastating night, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the Ashford ball, Eleanor woke to emptiness. Not the literal kind. The bed beside her still bore the impression of Adrian's body, sheets pulled tight in that military precision he'd perfected at boarding school, the indent of his head on the pillow, the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive with notes of bergamot and cedar that his valet laid out each morning alongside his precisely folded pocket squares. But emptiness, nonetheless. She stared at the ceiling of their bedroom, her bedroom, really, since Adrian had taken to sleeping in his study more nights than not, and counted the cherubs painted across the plaster. 14. She'd counted them 1,000 times, maybe more. At some point in their 5-year marriage, she'd stopped marking the days and started marking the nights alone. "Your tea, Your Grace." Margaret appeared with the silver tray, setting it on the bedside table with practiced silence. The older woman had been with Eleanor since before the wedding, one of the few constants in a life that had transformed overnight from country gentleman's daughter to duchess. She never asked questions, never commented on the empty side of the bed or the dark circles Eleanor had stopped trying to hide. "Thank you." Eleanor's voice came out rougher than intended. She cleared her throat. "The blue gown for tonight, I think. The one with the pearl detailing." "An excellent choice, ma'am. Shall I have it pressed?" "Please." Margaret hesitated at the door, her weathered hand resting on the frame. For a moment, Eleanor thought she might say something. Really say something, the way she used to when Eleanor was 19 and terrified of her first season in London, when Margaret would sit on the edge of her bed and talk her through her fears like a mother might. But the moment passed. The door clicked shut. Eleanor poured her tea with steady hands, a skill she'd mastered alongside all the others required of a duchess. The steady hands for public appearances, the gracious smile for tedious dinner parties, the art of conversation that said everything and nothing, the ability to stand beside Adrian at a dozen events each week, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that looked intimate but felt choreographed, and never once let anyone see the gulf between them. She was good at it now, so good that sometimes she forgot where the performance ended, and she began. The tea was Earl Grey, perfectly steeped. She took a sip and tasted nothing. 3 floors down, in the East Wing study that smelled of leather and old books, and the brandy Adrian pretended he didn't drink before noon, the Duke sat at his desk and tried to focus on correspondence that didn't matter. "Lord Pemberton requests your presence at his autumn hunt. The Minister of Finance wishes to discuss the trade proposal. Your mother writes regarding the Vale family plot." He set the letter aside, unable to finish it. His mother's passive-aggressive missives about grandchildren could wait. Everything could wait. Everything except tonight, the Ashford ball. 800 guests, half of them watching for any crack in the Vale facade. The other half watching because that's what high society did. Turned human lives into spectator sport. Adrian stood, moved to the window overlooking the gardens. Frost edged the topiaries in silver. Winter was coming early this year, they said. He could see his breath fog the glass. "Your Grace?" He turned. Thomas, his secretary, stood in the doorway with another stack of correspondence. The man was relentlessly efficient, which Adrian appreciated most days and resented today. "The contracts from the Liverpool shipyard. They require your signature before the 15th. "Leave them." Thomas hesitated. "Sir, the deadline—" "I said leave them, Thomas." The edge in his voice made the secretary flinch. Adrian immediately regretted it, but the apology stuck in his throat the way everything else did these days. Thomas set the papers on the desk and retreated without another word. When the door closed, Adrian pressed his palms against the window frame and let his head drop forward. The cold glass felt good against his forehead. Real. Everything else felt like wading through water, every movement slow and heavy and wrong. He should go to Eleanor. They should discuss tonight's event, coordinate their performance the way they always did, who they'd speak with, which rumors needed addressing, how long they'd stay before making their perfectly timed exit. But the thought of climbing those stairs, knocking on her door, seeing that polite smile she wore like armor, his pocket watch read 10:30. He had a meeting at noon. That gave him 90 minutes. He grabbed his coat. The Hart townhouse sat in a neighborhood that straddled the line between respectable and bohemian. Narrow brick buildings with window boxes that actually held flowers, not just ornamental arrangements changed seasonally by staff. Washing lines strung between buildings. A bakery on the corner that smelled like cinnamon and yeast. Real smells made by real people who didn't have cooks. Adrian's carriage stopped a block away. He'd learned early on that discretion mattered, even here where nobody knew a duke from a shopkeeper. He walked the last stretch on foot, hat pulled low, and knocked 3 times on the green door. Lillian answered in a paint-stained smock, auburn hair piled messily on her head, a smudge of cerulean blue across her left cheekbone. She looked at him like he was a man, not a title. Like he was Adrian, not Duke Vale. "You're early," she said, but she was smiling. "Is that a problem?" "Depends. Are you going to model for me, or are you going to brood in the corner while I work?" Despite everything, he laughed. When was the last time he'd laughed at home? He couldn't remember. Brood, probably. Typical. But she stepped aside, let him in. The studio was chaos. Canvases stacked against walls, paint tubes scattered across every surface, brushes soaking in jars of turpentine that made his eyes water. Eleanor would have fainted at the disorder. His mother would have called the constable. Adrian loved it. He'd met Lillian 4 months ago at a gallery opening Eleanor had dragged him to. Some charity event for orphans or hospitals, or he couldn't remember. What he remembered was standing in front of an oil painting of a woman mid-dance, skirt swirling, face caught in an expression of pure joy, and feeling something crack open in his chest. "You don't like it." He'd turned to find a woman watching him, not with the practiced interest of society ladies who wanted Duchess connections, but with genuine curiosity. She wore a green dress that didn't quite fit the current fashion, her hair styled simply, no jewelry except small pearl earrings. "I do," he'd said, surprising himself with honesty. "I don't understand it, but I like it." "Good answer." She'd extended her hand. "Lillian Hart. I painted it." They talked for an hour. About art. About the way light changed color. About how she'd grown up in Cornwall helping her father with his fishing nets, and never imagined she'd end up in London painting for a living. She didn't know who he was, didn't care when she found out. Treated him like a person who happened to enjoy looking at paintings, not a duke who needed managing. When Eleanor had appeared at his elbow with that subtle touch that meant time to circulate, he'd felt the cage door swing shut again. But he'd gone back to the gallery the next week, and the week after, and eventually she'd invited him to her studio. "You look tired," Lillian said now, mixing paint on her palette. She'd gone back to the canvas she was working on, a street scene, rain-slicked cobblestones reflecting gaslight. "Big party tonight?" "The Ashford Ball." "Sounds dreadful." "It will be." She glanced at him, brush poised mid-stroke. "Then don't go." The simplicity of it almost made him laugh again, as if he could just not go. As if duty and obligation and 5 generations of Vale family legacy would evaporate because he decided to stay home. "I can't." "Can't or won't." "Does it matter?" Lillian set down her brush, wiped her hands on her smock, and came to sit beside him on the battered sofa that had probably cost £5 second-hand. Eleanor's smallest decorative pillow cost more than Lillian's entire furniture collection. "You come here almost every day now," Lillian said quietly. "You barely talk. You just sit and watch me work like you're hiding from something." "I'm not hiding. Adrian." She turned to face him, and her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold that caught the studio light, were too knowing. "What are we doing?" The question hung between them like smoke. He should leave, should stand up, make an excuse, walk out the door and never come back. Go home to Eleanor and their perfectly appointed house and their perfectly choreographed marriage and stop pretending there was anything else possible. Instead, he reached for Lillian's paint-stained hand. "I don't know," he said, and meant it. "I just know that here, with you, I can breathe." She didn't pull away. Didn't push him toward anything either. Just sat with him in the cluttered studio while winter light filtered through dirty windows and the world outside continued without them. "What's up?" Eleanor stood in front of her mirror while Margaret fastened the last clasp on the pearl necklace. The blue gown fit perfectly because everything in her wardrobe fit perfectly. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had taken Margaret 40 minutes. Her face was powdered, her lips rouged just enough to look natural. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a mannequin. "You're beautiful, ma'am," Margaret said softly. "Thank you." The words were automatic. His Grace is waiting in the entrance hall. Of course he was, punctual as always, playing his part as she played hers. Eleanor descended the grand staircase with practiced grace, one gloved hand on the banister, the other holding her skirts just high enough to avoid tripping. Adrian stood at the bottom in his evening wear, dark hair perfectly groomed, expression neutral. He looked up as she approached, and for just a second, less than a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt? Regret? She couldn't tell anymore. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you. You as well." They might have been strangers commenting on the weather. The carriage ride to the Ashford estate took 30 minutes. They spent it in silence, watching London scroll past through separate windows. Eleanor counted street lamps. Adrian studied his gloves. Neither reached for the other. "We should discuss Lord Pemberton," Adrian said finally, his voice too loud in the quiet space. "He'll want to talk about the trade routes. I'll redirect him to you if he approaches me. And Lady Ashford will ask about the charity committee. I'll confirm my attendance at the next meeting." This was how they communicated now. Logistics, strategy, the mechanics of being Duke and Duchess Vale in public while being nothing at all in private. The carriage slowed as they joined the line of vehicles approaching the estate. Through the window, Eleanor could see the mansion ablaze with light, figures moving behind curtains, the string quartet's music drifting faintly through the night air. She smoothed her skirts, checked her hair in the small mirror concealed in her fan, and prepared herself the way a soldier might prepare for battle. "Ready?" Adrian asked, his hand already on the door handle. Eleanor looked at him, really looked, maybe for the first time in months, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers, the invisible weight he carried that matched her own. "Does it matter?" she asked. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, but she saw it. Then the footman opened the door, and the performance began. The Ashford ball was exactly what Eleanor expected. Excessive, exhausting, and excruciatingly polite. The ballroom glittered with enough candles to light a small city. The champagne flowed from fountains. The orchestra played Strauss with mechanical precision, while couples twirled across the floor in practiced steps that looked spontaneous but weren't. Eleanor and Adrian made their entrance to polite applause, Adrian's hand settling at the small of her back in that gesture that looked possessive but felt empty. They smiled, they nodded, they separated to work the room like the practice team they were. "Duchess Vale, how wonderful to see you." Lady Ashford descended in a cloud of pink taffeta and expensive perfume, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Lady Ashford, thank you for the invitation. Your home is stunning as always." "You're too kind. And that gown, is it French?" "London, actually. Mrs. Beaumont's shop on—" "How provincial of you." Lady Ashford's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "But I suppose thrift is fashionable these days. Tell me, how is the Duke? I haven't seen him much this season. Keeping busy, I assume?" The question landed like a blade between Eleanor's ribs, perfectly aimed and politely delivered. She'd heard the whispers, of course, seen the speculative glances when Adrian arrived late to events or left early with thin excuses. The rumors that circulated through drawing rooms like smoke. The Duke was having an affair. The Duke was in financial trouble. The Duke was secretly dying of some wasting disease. Eleanor had dismissed them all, because acknowledging them meant acknowledging that something was wrong, and the entire architecture of their life was built on the foundation that nothing was wrong. "He's very well," Eleanor said smoothly, "occupied with business matters, as you know. The Liverpool shipyard contract has been demanding." Of course, business." Lady Ashford's eyes gleamed. "Though one does hope he finds time for leisure activities as well." The emphasis on leisure was deliberate. Eleanor felt her smile tighten. "We all need our diversions," she said carefully. "Indeed. Speaking of which, I must introduce you to Mrs. Fletcher. Her daughter is debuting this season, and I told her you'd have such wonderful advice. Eleanor let herself be steered toward a cluster of women, half listening to their chatter about debut balls and suitable matches, while her mind circled Lady Ashford's words like a dog worrying a bone. Leisure activities. She scanned the ballroom until she found Adrian near the far windows, deep in conversation with Lord Pemberton and two other men. His posture was relaxed, his expression engaged. He looked comfortable. Happy, even. When was the last time he looked happy with her? Don't you agree, Duchess? Eleanor blinked, realized Mrs. Fletcher was staring at her expectantly. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Could you repeat the question? The women exchanged glances. Eleanor felt the shift in the air, that particular quality that meant she'd slipped, shown a crack in the porcelain. She recovered quickly. Forgive me, I'm afraid I have a slight headache. The lights, you know. Immediate sympathy because a headache was acceptable. A moment of honest inattention was not. She excused herself, moving toward the refreshment table, and nearly collided with Adrian coming from the opposite direction. Careful, he said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. The touch felt like fire, or ice. Eleanor couldn't tell anymore. Thank you. She pulled away, poured herself champagne she didn't want. Lord Pemberton seems in good spirits. He agreed to the proposal. We'll sign next week. That's excellent news. Yes, they stood side by side, facing the ballroom, a united front of silk and superficiality. Anyone watching would see a devoted couple taking a brief respite from the social demands of the evening. No one would see the chasm between them. Eleanor, Adrian started, don't. I haven't said anything. You were about to apologize for something, or ask if I'm all right, or make some other meaningless gesture because you feel guilty. She kept her voice low, her smile fixed. Don't. I can't bear it tonight. His hand tightened on his champagne flute. I'm trying. Trying what? To be a husband? You should have started 5 years ago. The words came out sharper than she intended, cutting through the pretense they'd maintained for so long. Adrian's face went carefully blank, that particular expression he wore when she'd landed a hit. I should circulate, he said quietly. Yes, you should. He walked away. Eleanor watched him go, hating herself for the cruelty and hating him for deserving it. The evening dragged on. Eleanor danced with Lord Pemberton, with young Lord Hastings, who blushed through their entire waltz, with Lord Ashford himself, who held her too close and smelled of brandy and cigars. Between dances, she made conversation about nothing with people who cared about even less. All the while, she tracked Adrian across the ballroom like a ship following a distant lighthouse, watched him laugh at some joke, saw him step onto the terrace for air, noticed when he returned 20 minutes later with his cravat slightly askew. 20 minutes. Long enough for a smoke, perhaps, or a conversation that couldn't happen inside, or something else entirely. The thought arrived like a splinter working its way deeper under skin. Eleanor tried to dismiss it, but Lady Ashford's words circled back. Leisure activities. Where did Adrian go on all those afternoons when he said he had meetings? Why did he come home smelling faintly of turpentine and paint? Why did he sometimes have smudges of color on his cuffs that the laundry couldn't explain? The ballroom suddenly felt too small, too hot, too full of people pretending to be other people while judging everyone around them for doing the same. Eleanor set down her champagne and headed for the ladies' retiring room, needing 5 minutes of peace, 5 minutes where she didn't have to smile or perform or pretend her marriage wasn't dissolving like sugar in rain. The retiring room was mercifully empty. She sank onto the velvet settee and pressed cool fingers to her temples, closing her eyes against the candlelight. Headache? Eleanor's eyes snapped open. Lady Catherine Winters stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been something sharper. Just tired, Eleanor said. Understandable, these events are exhausting even when one's marriage isn't falling apart. The words hung in this perfumed air like thrown knives. Eleanor's training screamed at her to deflect, to laugh it off, to maintain the fiction. But she was so tired of fiction. I don't know what you mean, she said anyway. Catherine closed the door, came to sit beside her. They'd been friends once, before Eleanor married Adrian and ascended to a sphere where real friendship became complicated by politics and positioning. Eleanor? Catherine's voice was gentle. Everyone knows. Knows what? About the Duke. About his distraction. The word mistress remained unspoken. but it filled the room nonetheless. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She folded them in her lap, pressed them together until her knuckles went white. I don't know what rumors you've heard. It's not rumor. My cousin saw him at a gallery in Bloomsbury, then later at a townhouse near Regent's Park, with a woman, a painter, I believe. Something inside Eleanor cracked, not broke. That would have been cleaner. This was a slow fissure, the kind that spreads through porcelain before it shatters completely. I see, she managed. I'm sorry. I thought you should know. And everyone else? Do they all know too? Catherine's silence was answer enough. Eleanor stood, smoothed her skirts with hands that still trembled. In the mirror above the mantel, she looked perfectly composed. Amazing, really, how well she'd learned to hide. Thank you for telling me, she said. Eleanor, wait. But she was already walking back into the ballroom, into the lights and music and hundreds of eyes that suddenly felt like they'd been watching her fail this entire time. She found Adrian by the champagne fountain, laughing at something Lord Hastings had said. He looked lighter than she'd seen him in months, unburdened, because he'd set down the weight of their marriage and given it to someone else to carry. Eleanor walked up to him, placed her hand on his arm with the possessive grace of a wife, and smiled. Darling, might I borrow you for a moment? He looked down at her, surprise flickering across his face at the endearment they'd stopped using years ago. Of course. She led him toward the terrace, away from the crowd, into the cold November air that bit through her gown but felt clarifying after the suffocating warmth inside. Eleanor, what? Who is she? Adrian froze. In the moonlight, she could see his face go pale. Don't lie to me, please. After everything, don't lie. He looked away, jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might deny it anyway, might insult her intelligence along with everything else. Then his shoulders sagged. Her name is Lillian Hart. She's a painter. There it was. The truth, finally given shape and weight. How long? 4 months. Do you love her? The question surprised them both. Adrian's eyes snapped to hers, searching for something, permission perhaps, or condemnation. I don't know, he said quietly. I just know that with her, I remember what it feels like to be myself instead of this. He gestured vaguely at his formal wear, at the ballroom behind them, at the entire elaborate construction of their lives. Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound that scattered into the night. So you found escape. How lovely for you. Eleanor, and what about me, Adrian? What am I supposed to do while you play at being real with your painter? Continue smiling through dinner parties? Keep pretending we're the perfect couple while you come home smelling like someone else's life? You could leave, he said, and the words landed like a physical blow. You could walk away tomorrow. Divorce me. Scandal be damned. You know I can't do that. Because of reputation? Because of what people would say? Because I have nowhere else to go. The admission tore out of her, raw and ugly. My father's estate is bankrupt. My sisters depend on connections I've made through this marriage. If I leave you, I lose everything. My home, my position, my ability to help my family. You have the luxury of escape because you have money and title and power that can't be taken away. I have nothing except what you've given me. That's not fair. None of this is fair, her voice cracked. I didn't choose this either, Adrian. I didn't choose a husband who would look at me across the breakfast table like I was furniture, who would build a life with someone else while I sat at home maintaining the illusion. You want honesty? Here's honesty. I hate you. I hate our marriage, and I hate that I'm trapped in it while you get to feel alive with someone who isn't me. The words hung between them, finally true. Adrian's face was unreadable in the shadows. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Then what do we do? Eleanor looked back at the ballroom, at the light and music and people dancing through their own elaborate performances, all of them pretending, all of them trapped in various versions of the same cage. We survive, she said. The same way we always have. She walked back inside, leaving him on the terrace. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Eleanor danced. She smiled. She made all the right conversation with all the right people. And when the clock struck 1 and Adrian appeared at her elbow to make their exit, she took his arm like a dutiful wife. In the carriage home, neither spoke. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with a glass of brandy he didn't drink, watching dawn creep across the London skyline. Somewhere in the city, Lillian was probably already awake, mixing paints in her chaotic studio, humming something off-key while she worked. Did she think of him? Did she wonder where he was, who he was with, what kind of life he returned to when he left her door? He told her about Eleanor, of course. Not everything, but enough. The loveless marriage, the duty and obligation. The feeling of slowly suffocating under expectations he'd never wanted but couldn't escape. Lillian had listened without judgment. You should talk to her, she'd said. Really talk. But what was there to say that hadn't been said in their 5 years of careful silence? The sun rose. Adrian watched it paint the city gold, then gray as clouds rolled in. Rain started around 7, streaking the windows. By 8, the household staff had begun their morning routines. He heard them moving through the halls below, the distant clatter of breakfast preparations. By 9, he knew what he had to do. He found Eleanor in the morning room, surrounded by correspondence. She didn't look up when he entered. We need to talk, he said. I believe we did that last night. Eleanor, please. She set down her pen, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at him with eyes that held no warmth. What else is there to discuss? You have your painter. I have my pride. We continue as we are until one of us dies or society finally admits what it already knows, that the perfect veil marriage is a complete fiction. I don't want that. What do you want, Adrian? To have both? To keep me as your duchess for appearances while you live your real life with her? No, I want... He stopped, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence. I want something real. Then go be real with her. Just stop pretending to try with me. The resignation in her voice was worse than anger would have been. Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. If I could go back... But you can't. None of us can. We made our choices, and now we live with them. She stood, gathered her correspondence. I have a charity meeting at noon. I assume you'll be out this afternoon? Eleanor, please stop saying my name like it means something to you. It doesn't. We both know it doesn't. She walked past him, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the weight of everything they'd never been to each other. Adrian stayed at the window long after she'd gone, watching rain turn the garden to mud, and wondered how they'd arrived at this particular version of hell. The weeks that followed were quieter than Eleanor expected. She and Adrian existed in separate orbits within the same house, crossing paths only when necessary. Dinners were taken in silence or not at all. Social engagements were coordinated through notes left with staff. The illusion of marriage continued publicly while privately dissolving into nothing. Eleanor threw herself into her charity work with new fervor, attending every meeting, organizing every fundraiser, filling her days with enough activity to exhaust herself into dreamless sleep. If people noticed her increased dedication, they attributed it to noble duchess behavior, not desperate escape. Adrian grew more distant, more absent. He stopped making excuses for where he went, and Eleanor stopped asking. December arrived with early snow and the dreaded announcement, the Winter Gala. The social event of the season, hosted by the Queen herself, required attendance for everyone in their sphere. No excuses, no exceptions. Eleanor received the invitation and felt dread settle in her stomach like lead. An entire evening maintaining the perfect marriage facade in front of everyone who mattered. Hours of performance while her husband's mistress existed somewhere in the city, probably painting something beautiful while Eleanor painted on a smile. She should have seen it coming, should have anticipated that pressure and pretense would eventually reach a breaking point. But she was so tired of anticipating. So tired of managing, so tired of everything. The morning of the Winter Gala, Adrian knocked on her bedroom door. Actually knocked, like a stranger. Come in, she called. He stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable in his own home. About tonight. What about it? We should coordinate. Plan our approach. The way we always do, you mean? His jaw tightened. Eleanor, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, I'm just empty. She turned back to her mirror, began fastening her earrings. We'll arrive together, smile together, dance the requisite waltz, and leave separately. You'll do whatever you do these days. I'll come home and count cherubs on the ceiling, same as always. It doesn't have to be like this. Eleanor met his eyes in the mirror. Then change it, Adrian. Leave, file for divorce. Destroy both our reputations and free us from this. But if you won't do that, then stop pretending there's some other option where we're both happy and no one gets hurt. We're already hurt. We've been bleeding out for 5 years. He flinched at that. Good. She wanted him to flinch. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I know. That's the worst part. You didn't hate me enough to be cruel on purpose. You just forgot I existed. And somehow that hurts more. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. What could he say that would matter? He left. Eleanor finished getting ready in the silence he'd left behind. The winter gala transformed the palace into something from a fairy tale, all ice sculptures and white roses and crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across marble floors. The queen held court in the main ballroom, resplendent in sapphires and silk, while her guests swirled around her like planets around the sun. Eleanor and Adrian arrived fashionably late, making their entrance to murmured appreciation. She wore silver, not her usual choice, but tonight she wanted to feel like armor. Adrian's hand settled at her back, warm through the thin fabric. They made their rounds, smiled, nodded, exchanged pleasantries with people whose names blurred together. Duchess Vale, Duke Vale, how wonderful. Your Grace, you look stunning. Must discuss the Liverpool contract, Duke. Eleanor's face hurt from smiling. Her feet ached in shoes designed for beauty, rather than comfort. The champagne tasted like regret. She needed air. Excuse me, she murmured to Lady Something or Other and headed for the terrace. The December cold bit through her gown immediately, but she welcomed it. Real sensation, real cold, something that felt honest. Pretty prison, isn't it? Eleanor turned to find Lady Catherine beside her, wrapped in furs, looking at the glittering ballroom through the glass doors. It's lovely, Eleanor said automatically. It's suffocating, all of it. The expectations, the performance, the pretense that any of this matters. Catherine took a long sip of champagne. My husband asked me yesterday if I'd ever loved him. Married 15 years, and he just now thought to ask. What did you tell him? The truth. That I loved the idea of him. The security, the position, the escape from my father's house. But him? The actual man? I barely know him. She laughed bitterly. He looked relieved, as if my admission freed him from guilt about his own indifference. Eleanor said nothing. What was there to say? At least you and the Duke maintain the illusion, Catherine continued. Half the ballroom is placing bets on which couple will scandalize everyone first. The Vales never even made the list because you're too perfect. Something snapped inside Eleanor. Some final thread holding together the careful architecture of her composure. We're not perfect, she said. We're dying, slowly, politely, in full view of everyone too blinded by our performances to notice. Catherine's eyes widened. But Eleanor was already walking back inside, driven by something she couldn't name. Rage or desperation or 5 years of swallowed truth demanding release. She found Adrian by the champagne fountain, mid-conversation with Lord Pemberton. Saw him laugh at some joke. Saw him look content and comfortable and completely at ease in this world that was killing her. And she was done. Done pretending. Done protecting him. Done maintaining the illusion that any of this was acceptable. Eleanor picked up a champagne flute from a passing servant's tray and walked directly toward her husband. Every eye in the ballroom seemed to track her movement, sensing something different in her bearing. She reached Adrian. He turned, smile already in place. Eleanor, Lord Pemberton was just... She threw the champagne in his face. The ballroom went silent. 300 people stopped mid-conversation, mid-dance, mid-breath. Adrian stood frozen, champagne dripping from his hair, his cravat, his perfectly tailored evening jacket. Shock painted his features. Eleanor's voice rang clear in the sudden quiet. Tell them. Tell them all about her. The champagne dripped onto marble like rain on a funeral shroud. Adrian's hand came up slowly, wiping liquid from his eyes. His movements mechanical as if his brain couldn't quite process what had just happened. Eleanor stood perfectly still, the empty flute dangling from her fingers. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, to take back the last 30 seconds, to rewind time and swallow the words that still echoed in the crystal-perfect silence. But she was so tired of swallowing. Eleanor, Adrian's voice came out strangled. What are you? Her name is Lillian Hart. Eleanor heard her own voice like it belonged to someone else, clear and steady and completely unrecognizable. She's a painter. She lives in a townhouse near Regent's Park. You've been seeing her for 4 months. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's champagne flute hit the floor and shattered, the sound impossibly loud. Adrian's face drained of color. You don't know what you're saying, don't I? Something wild was unfurling in Eleanor's chest, something that had been caged for so long it had grown teeth. You come home smelling like turpentine. You have paint on your cuffs. You disappear for hours and lie about meetings that don't exist. Did you think I was blind, Adrian, or just stupid? This isn't the place. Where is the place? Her voice rose. Our bedroom where you haven't slept in months? The breakfast table where we pretend to read newspapers instead of looking at each other? Tell me, where exactly should I have this conversation about my husband's mistress? Lord Pemberton took a step back, nearly knocking into a woman behind him. The crowd shifted, creating a widening circle around them like they were watching a carriage accident in slow motion. You're being hysterical, Adrian said, but his hand shook as he pulled out a handkerchief. The word hysterical landed like a slap. Eleanor laughed, high and sharp. Am I? Let's ask Lady Catherine. She's the one who told me about your little gallery meetings. Or Lord Ashford. His wife certainly had opinions about your leisure activities. She turned to address the frozen ballroom. Anyone else want to share what they know about the Duke's painter? The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, I heard she's quite beautiful. Another voice. Common, though. No breeding. A third. The scandal of the season. The murmurs built like gathering thunder. Adrian's jaw clenched so tight Eleanor could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Enough! His voice cut through the noise. Eleanor, we are leaving. Now! No! The single word stopped him cold. No? He repeated, disbelief warring with fury in his expression. I'm not leaving. I'm not protecting you anymore. I'm not smiling through another performance while you destroy what's left of me. Eleanor set the champagne flute on a nearby table with exaggerated care. You want the truth? Here it is. Our marriage is a lie. Has been from the start. We don't love each other. We barely like each other. We're two people trapped in a contract we both want to escape but are too cowardly to end. Eleanor, stop. Why? Because it's embarrassing? Because everyone's watching? She gestured to the crowd. They already knew, Adrian. We were the only ones still pretending. Adrian grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. You will regret this. Eleanor looked down at his hand, then back at his face. In his eyes, she saw something she'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something close to panic. Fear of losing control, maybe. Fear of the consequences she'd just unleashed. She pulled free. I already regret everything. At least now I'm honest about it. She walked toward the ballroom exit, every eye following her path. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through. Behind her, Adrian called her name. Once, twice. She didn't turn around. The palace corridors stretched endless and cold. Eleanor's heels clicked against stone, echoing off walls lined with portraits of queens and kings who'd probably endured their own versions of this nightmare. She had no destination, just the overwhelming need to be anywhere else. Duchess Vale! Eleanor didn't stop. Footsteps pursued her. Your Grace, please, wait. A hand caught her elbow. Eleanor spun, ready to unleash whatever remained of her fury, and found herself facing a young woman in servant's livery, breathless and wide-eyed. Your cloak, ma'am. You'll freeze. The girl held out Eleanor's fur-lined cloak, her expression caught between pity and fascination. She'd seen it all, Eleanor realized. Every servant in the palace had probably heard by now. Thank you, Eleanor managed, accepting the cloak with hands that had started shaking. There's a side exit through the East Gallery. Less public. Eleanor met the girl's eyes and saw understanding there. How many servants had witnessed their own versions of tonight's disaster? How many had stood silent while their employers performed perfect marriages for ballroom audiences? What's your name? Eleanor asked. Mary, ma'am. Thank you, Mary. The girl bobbed a curtsy and disappeared back the way she'd come, leaving Eleanor alone with her cloak and her shattered composure. The East Gallery was deserted, lit only by moonlight through tall windows. Eleanor wrapped the cloak around herself and pushed through the exit into December cold that stole her breath. Snow had started falling, fat, wet flakes that caught in her hair and melted against her cheeks. Or maybe those were tears. She couldn't tell anymore. Eleanor walked. She had no plan, no direction, just the desperate need to keep moving. The palace grounds gave way to streets she half recognized, then streets she didn't know at all. Her silver gown dragged through slush. Her feet went numb in her delicate shoes. She should have been cold, should have been terrified, a duchess wandering London alone after midnight. But she felt nothing except a strange, hollow freedom. The perfect cage had finally broken open. Somewhere in her wandering, she found herself on a bridge spanning the Thames. The water below was black and swirling, reflecting nothing. Eleanor gripped the stone railing and looked down into that darkness and understood finally why people jumped. Not because they wanted to die, because they wanted the falling to stop. Bit cold for a midnight stroll in it. Eleanor turned. A woman leaned against the bridge railing a few feet away, wrapped in threadbare shawls, watching Eleanor with shrewd eyes. "I'm fine," Eleanor said automatically. "Course you are. Fancy ladies always fine when they're crying on bridges in the middle of winter?" The woman pulled a flask from her layers of clothing, took a sip, then offered it to Eleanor. "Want some? It's terrible, but it's warm." Eleanor stared at the flask. Every rule of society, every lesson drilled into her since childhood screamed that duchesses did not drink from strangers' flasks on bridges. Duchesses maintained dignity. Duchesses went home to their marriages and kept their scandals private. Eleanor took the flask and drank. It burned like liquid fire going down, cheap whiskey that tasted like mistakes. She coughed, handed it back, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "What happened?" the woman asked, not unkindly. "I destroyed my life." "Nah, you just stopped pretending you had one worth keeping." Another sip from the flask. "Saw it in your eyes soon as you walked up. That look people get when they finally admit the truth they've been avoiding. You don't know anything about me, don't I?" The woman gestured at Eleanor's gown, her jewelry, the whole expensive disaster of her appearance. Rich girl, married rich, miserable ever since. Husband's got another woman, probably. You finally said something about it in front of people who matter. Now you're here wondering if you made the right choice. Eleanor's laugh came out broken. "How did you—" "Seen it before. Different dresses, same story." The woman tucked the flask away. "Question is, what you gonna do about it?" "I don't know." "Well, figure it out quick. This bridge is freezing and you're starting to turn blue." Eleanor looked down at her hands, at the silver gown now soaked and ruined, at the whole expensive costume of her former life, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, that would take longer, but maybe the beginning of it. "I can't go back," she said. "Then don't." "It's not that simple, see?" "Sure it is. Simple don't mean easy, but it's still simple. You got money?" Eleanor thought of the household account she managed, the allowance Adrian provided, the jewelry around her neck worth more than this woman probably saw in a year. "Yes." "Then you got options, more than most." The woman pushed off the railing. "But standing here ain't one of them. Go home, get warm, then decide if you're going to be the duchess who broke down on a bridge or the woman who rebuilt herself after." She walked away into the snow, leaving Eleanor alone with the Thames and her thoughts. Eleanor stood there for another minute, maybe 5, watching snowflakes disappear into dark water. Then she turned back toward the palace, toward the wreckage waiting for her, and started walking. By the time she found a hackney willing to take her home, her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely give the driver the address. The Vale townhouse appeared through swirling snow like a prison she was volunteering to return to. Every window blazed with light. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Adrian was home. The front door opened before she reached it. Margaret stood in the entrance, her face pale with worry, still in her nightclothes with a shawl thrown over. "Oh, ma'am!" Relief flooded the older woman's features. "Thank heavens! The Duke came home hours ago and said, we didn't know where—" "I'm fine, Margaret." Eleanor stepped inside, suddenly aware of how she must look. Soaked, frozen, her careful styling destroyed. "Just needed air." "He's in his study. Been there since he returned. Won't speak to anyone." Eleanor peeled off her ruined cloak. "Good." "Ma'am, what happened? The servants are saying—" "I'm sure they are." Eleanor headed for the stairs, leaving wet footprints on expensive carpet. "I'm going to bed. Please tell the Duke not to disturb me. Or better yet, tell him nothing at all." She climbed to her bedroom and shut the door, turned the lock for the first time in their marriage. Let Adrian sleep in his study. Let him drown in whatever guilt or anger or regret he was marinating in. She had her own drowning to attend to. Eleanor peeled off the silver gown. It would never be wearable again, and stood in her chemise, shivering. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, hair loose and tangled, makeup smeared, eyes haunted, but alive. Finally, unmistakably alive. A knock at the door made her jump. "Eleanor!" Adrian's voice, muffled by wood. She didn't answer. "I know you're awake, please. We need to talk." "Go away, Adrian." "Eleanor!" "I said go away." The words tore out of her. "You don't get to demand anything right now. Not conversation, not explanations, not absolution. Just leave me alone." Silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. Eleanor sank onto the bed and waited for tears that didn't come. Maybe she'd cried herself empty on the bridge. Maybe there was nothing left. She must have slept eventually because dawn woke her with gray light and a pounding headache. For one blissful moment, she forgot what had happened. Then reality crashed back. The winter gala. The champagne. The crowd. Her words echoing through crystal silence. She'd really done it. Really destroyed everything in spectacular public fashion. A folded note had been slipped under her door sometime during the night. Eleanor recognized Adrian's handwriting before she opened it. "We need to discuss what happens next. Breakfast at 8. Please." The please struck her as funny. After 5 years of carefully avoiding each other, now he wanted to sit down for breakfast like civilized people. Eleanor tore the note in half and threw it in the fireplace. By the time Margaret appeared with tea at 7:30, Eleanor had bathed, dressed in a simple day gown, and pinned her hair up with shaking hands. She looked almost normal if you didn't examine too closely. "The Duke is asking," Margaret began. "Tell him I'm not available." "Ma'am, he's insisting." "Then let him insist." Eleanor took the tea tray from Margaret's hands. "I'm not ready to see him. Not today. Maybe not ever." Margaret's expression flickered between sympathy and concern. "The morning papers have arrived." Eleanor's hand stilled on the teacup. "I see. Would you like me to bring them?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. She returned moments later with a stack of newspapers, her face carefully neutral. Eleanor waited until the door closed before unfolding the first one. The headline hit like a physical blow. "Scandal at Winter Gala. Duchess accuses Duke of infidelity." Below it, an illustration showed a woman throwing champagne at a man's face, the crowd around them rendered in shocked silhouettes. Eleanor forced herself to read. Last evening's Winter Gala descended into unprecedented scandal when Duchess Eleanor Vale publicly confronted her husband, Duke Adrian Vale, accusing him of conducting an affair with a woman identified as Miss Lillian Hart, an artist residing in Bloomsbury. Witnesses report the Duchess threw champagne at the Duke before delivering a scathing indictment of their 5-year marriage, calling it a lie before a stunned audience of nobility. The article continued for paragraphs, each one more excruciating than the last. Every word she'd said had been captured, analyzed, embellished. Her humiliation had been transformed into entertainment for breakfast tables across London. The other papers were no better. Some portrayed her as wronged wife finally driven to desperation. Others suggested she'd lost her mind. One particularly vicious column implied she'd manufactured the scandal for attention. Eleanor set the papers aside and poured herself more tea with steady hands. This was it then. The consequence of truth. The price of honesty. Was it worth it? Another knock. Not Adrian's confident knock. This one was tentative, almost apologetic. "Come in," Eleanor called. The door opened to reveal Thomas, Adrian's secretary, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but there are visitors. Downstairs, quite a few of them." Eleanor's stomach sank. "Who?" "Lady Catherine Winters, Lady Ashford, Lord Pemberton, several others. They're asking to see the Duke and you. Tell them we're not receiving visitors." "I tried, ma'am. They're being rather insistent." Of course they were. Scandal drew society like blood drew sharks. Eleanor stood, smoothed her skirts. "I'll handle it." She descended the stairs to find the entrance hall packed with exactly the people she'd expected. The curious, the judgmental, the ones who wanted front-row seats to the collapse of the Vale marriage. Lady Ashford stood at the front of the crowd, resplendent in purple silk, her expression radiating false concern. "Duchess Vale! Oh, my dear, we simply had to come see how you were managing after last night's unfortunate display. Unfortunate display. As if Eleanor had spilled wine, not demolished her entire life. How thoughtful, Eleanor said flatly. As you can see, I'm fine. But surely you're not, that is, after such accusations. The accusations were true. Eleanor descended the last few steps, met Lady Ashford's gaze directly. My husband is having an affair. Has been for months. I simply finally said it out loud. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the group. Lady Catherine pushed forward, her face genuinely worried. Eleanor, perhaps we could speak privately. Why? So you can convince me to recant? To apologize? To save face? Eleanor shook her head. I'm done saving face. If you came here hoping to witness me falling apart, I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm perfectly intact. Ruined, perhaps, but intact. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. The Duke, is he available? The Duke is unavailable. To you, to me, to anyone who isn't his lawyer. Eleanor moved toward the door, opening it in clear dismissal. Thank you for your concern. You can show yourselves out. Lady Ashford's mouth fell open. Well, I never... No, you probably haven't. Never been honest, never been real, never been anything except what people expect. Eleanor held the door wider. But I'm trying something different now. It's terrifying and probably stupid, but at least it's mine. They filed out in offended silence, casting backward glances like she was an animal at the zoo. Eleanor closed the door behind them and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. That was extraordinary. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. Adrian stood at the top of the stairs, still in yesterday's evening clothes, his hair disheveled, his expression unreadable. How long have you been there? She demanded. Long enough. He descended slowly, each step deliberate. You're right, you know, about everything. Don't. Eleanor, don't you dare try to bond with me over this. She pushed away from the door. Don't stand there looking tragic and expect me to comfort you. You did this. You destroyed us. We both did. He reached the bottom of the stairs. I found escape in Lillian, but you found yours in ice. You stopped trying long before I did. The accusation stung because it held truth. Maybe, Eleanor admitted. Maybe I gave up. Maybe I should have fought harder for something we both knew was broken from the start. But I didn't betray you, Adrian. I didn't find someone else to give me what you couldn't. Would it have been better if you had? At least then we'd be even. This isn't about even. This is about... Eleanor's voice cracked. She took a breath, forced calm. This is about the fact that I spent 5 years trying to be the wife you needed, while you spent 5 years wishing I was someone else. Adrian's face tightened. That's not fair. None of this is fair. That's my entire point. She moved past him toward the morning room, suddenly desperate for space that didn't smell like him, like them, like the ghost of what they'd never been. I want a divorce. The words fell into silence. Eleanor turned to find Adrian frozen on the stairs, his expression somewhere between shock and something that might have been relief. Eleanor, I mean it. I can't do this anymore. The pretending, the performing, the slow suffocation of existing beside someone who doesn't want me. I'd rather face scandal and poverty and social exile than spend one more day in this house pretending we're something we're not. You'd be ruined, Adrian said quietly. Divorced women are pariahs. You'd lose everything. I've already lost everything that matters. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. At least this way I choose how I lose it. Adrian came down the remaining stairs slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. What about your family? Your sisters who need society connections? They'll manage. People always do. Eleanor, be reasonable. I'm done being reasonable. Her voice rose. Reasonable got me a loveless marriage and a husband who finds comfort in someone else's arms. Reasonable got me 5 years of pretending to be happy while dying inside. I'm trying something different now. It's called honest, and it's terrifying, but it's better than reasonable ever was. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. He looked exhausted. Lost. Good. What about Lillian? Eleanor asked, surprising herself. Are you going to marry her? Make an honest woman of your mistress? I don't know. You don't know if you love her, or you don't know if you'll marry her. Both, neither. He sank onto the bottom stair, buried his face in his hands. I don't know anything anymore except that I've destroyed everything and hurt everyone, and there's no way to fix it. For just a moment, Eleanor felt a flicker of the pity that had kept her trapped for so long. He looked genuinely broken, genuinely sorry. Then she remembered 4 months of lies, the paint stains, the late nights, the way he'd looked at Lillian's artwork with more emotion than he'd ever shown his own wife. The pity died. "You're right," she said. "You can't fix it, so stop trying. Let me go, Adrian. Let us both go." He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "And then what?" "Then we figure out who we are when we're not performing for each other. Maybe you marry your painter. Maybe I learn to paint myself. Maybe we both discover we're capable of something real when we're not trapped in something fake." The long case clock in the hall chimed 9. Outside, London was waking up to news of their scandal, to breakfast table gossip and speculation. Inside, 2 people sat in the ruins of what they'd built and tried to imagine what came after demolition. "I'll speak to my solicitor," Adrian said finally. "Draw up the papers." Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight for words. "For what it's worth," Adrian continued, "I am sorry. Not for leaving, I think we both needed that, but for not being brave enough to leave honestly." "I'm sorry too," Eleanor heard herself say, "for not being brave enough to demand honesty." They sat in that admission for a long moment, the closest thing to real conversation they'd had in years. Then Adrian stood, straightened his rumpled clothes, and walked toward his study. Eleanor watched him go, the stranger she'd married, and felt nothing except hollow relief. The front door knocker sounded again. More visitors, probably, more vultures come to feast on scandal. Eleanor ignored it. Let Thomas handle them. Let the world gossip and speculate and judge. She had bigger concerns now. Like figuring out who Eleanor was when she wasn't Duchess Vale. Like learning to live in truth instead of performance. Like surviving the aftermath of burning down her own life. The knocker sounded a third time, more insistent. Eleanor moved toward the window and peered through the curtain. A crowd had gathered on the street, not just curious nobility now, but reporters clutching notebooks, sketch artists setting up easels, common folk who'd probably read the morning papers and come to gawk at the scandal house. Her home had become a spectacle. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Ma'am, there's a gentleman from the London Chronicle demanding a statement, and a woman claiming to be from the Society Gazette. Should I—" "Tell them nothing. Bar the doors if you must." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret hesitated. "Your mother has sent word. She's coming this afternoon." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Her mother? Of course. The woman who'd orchestrated this marriage in the first place, who'd seen Adrian's title and fortune as the solution to their family's financial ruin, who drilled into Eleanor that duty mattered more than happiness. "When she arrives, show her to the blue sitting room. And Margaret—" Eleanor caught the older woman's hand. "Thank you for staying." Margaret's eyes misted. "Where else would I go, ma'am? I was with you before him, and I'll be with you after." After. Such a small word for such an enormous unknown. The morning crawled by in a blur of refused visitors, and increasingly desperate messages slid under doors. Eleanor remained in the morning room, staring at cold tea and trying to plan a future that felt impossible to imagine. A divorce would take months, maybe years. She'd need lawyers, witnesses, evidence of Adrian's adultery formally documented. The process would drag every private moment into public scrutiny. Her name would be dragged through mud in every drawing room and newspaper in England. And at the end of it, she'd be a divorced woman. Unmarriageable. Unsuitable for polite society. Dependent on whatever settlement Adrian's lawyers would allow. The alternative was to recant. To claim temporary madness, feminine hysteria, anything that would let society sweep the scandal under expensive carpets. Adrian would likely agree. He wanted this nightmare over as badly as she did. They could rebuild the performance. Stiffer, more careful, but survivable. Eleanor looked around the morning room. The silk wallpaper she'd chosen. The furniture she'd arranged. The painting above the mantel that cost more than her father's estate made in a year. All of it bought with Adrian's money. All of it part of the cage she'd dressed in velvet. She'd rather burn it all down than live in it one more day. At precisely 2 o'clock, the blue sitting room door opened and Eleanor's mother swept in like a ship under full sail. Victoria Hartfield had aged well, her steel gray hair impeccably styled, her burgundy traveling dress expensive enough to remind everyone that her daughter had married up. Her face was set in an expression Eleanor knew well, controlled fury masked as maternal concern. Eleanor, what have you done? No greeting, no embrace, straight to condemnation. Eleanor stood but didn't approach. Hello, Mother. Don't hello, Mother. Me? I've spent the entire morning fielding questions from everyone in our social circle. Your sisters are being whispered about. Your father is having palpitations, and you— Victoria's voice shook with barely contained rage. You have destroyed everything I built for this family. You didn't build anything, Mother. You sold me to the highest bidder. Victoria's hand came up like she might strike. Eleanor didn't flinch. She was done flinching. How dare you, Victoria hissed. I secured your future, saved this family from ruin, and you repay me by throwing champagne at your husband like a common tavern wench. He was having an affair. So what? The words came out sharp as broken glass. Half the men in London keep mistresses. You smile through it. You maintain dignity. You don't create public spectacles that destroy your family's reputation. Eleanor laughed, brittle and wrong. My reputation, Mother. Mine. Not yours. I'm the one who has to live with the consequences. Your sisters will never marry well now. Your father's business connections will evaporate. All because you couldn't control your emotions for one more evening. Victoria moved closer, her perfume suffocating. You will fix this. You'll apologize to the Duke, claim temporary hysteria, and beg forgiveness today. No. Excuse me? I said no. I'm divorcing him. Victoria went pale, her hand gripping the back of a chair for support. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. A divorced woman is nothing. You'll have no place in society, no prospects, no protection. You'll be dependent on your father's charity, the same father whose debts Adrian paid off when you married. Is that what you want? To crawl back home in disgrace? The cruelty of it took Eleanor's breath. She'd known her family's financial situation was dire, but hearing it stated so baldly that she'd been bartered like livestock to settle accounts made bile rise in her throat. Maybe disgrace is better than this, Eleanor said quietly. This? Victoria gestured around the elegant room. Wealth? Status? Security? You're a duchess, Eleanor. Women would kill for what you have. Then let them have it. I'm done. Victoria's composure cracked. You ungrateful, foolish child. I sacrificed everything to make this match. Spent months courting his mother, orchestrating introductions, ensuring you were positioned perfectly. And you're throwing it away because your feelings are hurt? My feelings? Eleanor's voice rose. Mother, I've been dying inside for 5 years. Every day in this house is suffocation. Every smile is a lie. Every touch from him makes my skin crawl because I know he wishes I was someone else. Then become someone else, Victoria snapped. Be better. Be more charming, more beautiful, more interesting. Give him reason to stay. The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor stared at her mother and saw, finally, what she'd refused to see for 24 years. This woman didn't love her. Had never loved her. Eleanor was an investment, a chess piece, a means to an end. Get out, Eleanor said. Eleanor, I said get out. Go home to father and your precious social standing. Tell everyone I've lost my mind. I don't care anymore. Victoria drew herself up, every inch the offended aristocrat. You'll regret this. When Adrian cast you aside with nothing, when you're living in some rented room scrubbing your own floors, you'll remember this conversation, and you'll know I was right. Maybe, but at least I'll be free. Victoria's face twisted with something that might have been pain if Eleanor hadn't known better. You were always weak. Even as a child, I'd hoped marriage would strengthen you, but you're as fragile as ever. She swept toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Don't come crying to us when this falls apart. You made your choice. Live with it. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than slamming. Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. She'd known her mother would be angry, but the depth of that anger, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of concern for Eleanor's actual well-being, left her hollowed out. She sat alone in the blue sitting room as afternoon light faded to evening, trying to remember if her mother had ever asked if she was happy, ever cared about anything except appearances and advantage. The answer was simple and devastating. No. A soft knock broke through her spiraling thoughts. Thomas appeared, looking apologetic. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but there's someone at the servants' entrance. A Miss Lillian Hart. She's asking to speak with you. Eleanor's head snapped up. Lillian Hart is here? Now? Yes, ma'am. I told her you weren't receiving visitors, but she says it's urgent. Of all the audacity. The mistress coming to the wife's home like it was some kind of social call. Eleanor should refuse. Should have Thomas turn her away with all the frost a Duke's secretary could muster. Instead, she heard herself say, "Show her to the library, and Thomas, make sure the Duke doesn't know she's here." Yes, Your Grace. Eleanor stood, smoothed her dress, and tried to prepare herself for meeting the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage. What did one say in such circumstances? The etiquette book certainly didn't cover it. The library was Adrian's domain, all dark wood and leather-bound books he'd probably never read. Lillian Hart stood by the window, silhouetted against dying light. She was smaller than Eleanor expected, dressed simply in a brown wool dress with paint stains on the cuffs. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, wisps escaping around her face. She turned when Eleanor entered, and Eleanor saw she'd been crying. "Duchess Vale, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right." "You don't." Eleanor closed the door, leaned against it. "Why are you here?" Lillian twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with the bold woman who'd taken another woman's husband. "I read the papers, saw what happened at the gala, and I had to come. To explain." "Explain what? That you're sleeping with my husband?" "I'm aware." Lillian flinched. "It's not. We haven't. It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm standing, it seems quite simple. He's married to me, conducting an affair with you, and now both our lives are ruins. What part of that is complicated?" "The part where he loves you." Eleanor laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "He has a fascinating way of showing it." "No, listen." Lillian took a step forward, urgency in her voice. "I know how this looks. I know what I am in this story, the other woman, the homewrecker. But it's not like that. Adrian comes to my studio and we talk. That's all. Just talk. He's never touched me, never kissed me, never—" Her voice caught. "He talks about you constantly. How intelligent you are. How brave. How you've survived 5 years of a marriage that was killing you both." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then why? Why seek comfort with you if he supposedly cares so much?" "Because you terrify him." Lillian moved to the desk, gripped its edge. "Everything about you reminds him that he's failing, as a husband, as a man, as a partner. With me, he can pretend to be someone else, someone uncomplicated who doesn't carry the weight of disappointing the woman he married." "So I'm the villain? I'm the one who drove him to your door?" "No. He's the villain, and the victim, and so are you." Lillian's eyes met Eleanor's, and they were devastatingly sad. "We're all just broken people making terrible choices because we don't know how to be honest." Eleanor wanted to rage at her, to scream that she had no right to philosophy and understanding, but the fight had drained out of her somewhere between her mother's cruelty and this woman's unexpected empathy. "Why are you really here?" Eleanor asked quietly. "To tell you he'll let you go. If you want the divorce, he won't fight it. He told me this morning." Lillian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And to apologize. I never meant to hurt you. I genuinely didn't know how deep the damage went until I read what you said at the gala. How you've been suffering while I listened to him talk about art and freedom, like those were the only things that mattered." "Are you in love with him?" The question hung between them. Lillian looked away, out the window at the darkening street. "I don't know, maybe, but it doesn't matter, does it? Because he'll never really leave you, not emotionally. You'll always be the woman he failed, and that will haunt him more than any love could heal." Eleanor moved to the desk, poured herself brandy from Adrian's decanter with shaking hands. She didn't offer any to Lillian. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "With you two? Nothing. I told him not to come back." Lillian turned from the window. "I can't be his escape anymore. It's not fair to any of us. You, me, or him. He needs to face what he's done, and I need to stop being complicit in someone else's destruction." "How noble of you." "It's not noble. It's survival. I've seen what happens to women who get tangled up in married men's messes. We get labeled and discarded while they move on to the next distraction." Lillian moved toward the door, paused beside Eleanor. For what it's worth, I think you're extraordinarily brave. What you did at the gala, standing up and telling the truth, even though it destroyed you, that's courage I've never had. It doesn't feel brave, it feels reckless and stupid. Maybe brave always does in the moment. Maybe that's how you know it's real. Lillian left as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving Eleanor alone with Brandy and questions that had no good answers. The library door opened minutes later. Adrian stood in the entrance, his face haggard. I saw her leaving. What did she want? To apologize, to release you. Take your pick. Eleanor set down the brandy glass harder than necessary. Did you know she was coming? No, I told her to stay away from here. Because it would look bad? Or because you can't handle us both in the same room? Adrian crossed to the desk, poured his own brandy. Both probably. I'm a coward, Eleanor. I think we've established that. She says you love me. His hand stilled on the decanter. She shouldn't have. Is it true? What does it matter now? It matters to me. Eleanor's voice cracked. 5 years, Adrian. 5 years of silence and distance and pretending we felt nothing. And now I find out you might actually feel something you just never bothered to tell me? That matters. Fine. Yes. I love you. Is that what you wanted to hear? He slammed the decanter down. I've loved you since our 3rd month of marriage when you found me having a panic attack in the garden at 2 a.m, and instead of judging me, you sat with me until dawn talking about nothing and everything. I loved you when you stood up to my mother for dismissing the staff member who had a sick child. I loved you every time you smiled at me across a ballroom, even though I could see the exhaustion in your eyes. Eleanor's breath caught. Then why? Because love isn't enough. The words exploded out of him. Loving you didn't make me a better husband. It didn't stop me from disappointing you every single day. It didn't fix whatever's broken in me that makes intimacy feel like suffocation and commitment feel like drowning. So yes, I loved you while I destroyed us. Does that make you feel better? No, it makes it worse. They stood on opposite sides of the desk, the space between them feeling infinite. I saw my solicitor today, Adrian said finally. He's drawing up divorce papers. Adultery as grounds. It'll be ugly, but quick. And then what? You marry Lillian? She told me not to come back. Said she won't be my escape hatch anymore. He laughed bitterly. Apparently everyone's figured out I'm a disaster except me. Adrian, the library door burst open. Thomas stood there wild-eyed and breathless. Your Grace, there's a fire in the East Wing. Eleanor's heart stopped. What? The reporter's outside. Someone threw a lit torch through a window. The curtain's caught. We're trying to contain it, but Adrian was already moving, Eleanor right behind him. They ran through corridors filling with smoke, servants scrambling with buckets of water, someone screaming for the fire brigade. The East Wing guest rooms were engulfed, flames licking up wallpaper and consuming furniture that had stood for 3 generations. Heat hit them like a wall. Everyone out, Adrian shouted. Get the staff out now. Margaret appeared through the smoke, supporting an older maid who was coughing violently. The upstairs rooms. Is anyone... Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The 3rd floor, the housemaid's quarters. They should all be downstairs, Thomas gasped. Should be isn't the same as our. Eleanor ran for the servants' stairs before Adrian could stop her. Smoke thickened as she climbed, each breath harder than the last. The 3rd floor hallway was an inferno, flames racing along the ceiling. Hello? She screamed. Is anyone here? A muffled cry from the far end of the hall. Eleanor ran toward it, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Found a door jammed shut, something blocking it from the inside. She threw her weight against it once, twice. Adrian appeared beside her. Move. Together they slammed into the door. It gave way, and they tumbled into a room where 2 young maids huddled by the window, paralyzed with fear. Come on! Eleanor grabbed one girl's hand. Adrian took the other. They ran back toward the stairs through flames that were closing in. Heat so intense, Eleanor's skin felt like it was blistering. The main staircase was blocked now, fire spreading faster than possible. Adrian changed direction, pulling them toward the back stairs used for laundry. They burst out into the garden, all of them coughing and gasping. The fire brigade had arrived, men swarming with hoses and equipment. Half of London seemed to be watching, the crowd from earlier now joined by hundreds more drawn by flames and scandal. Eleanor collapsed on cold grass, lungs burning. Adrian fell beside her, both of them covered in soot and ash. "You're insane," he gasped. "Running into a burning building. You followed me." "Because you're insane and I'm apparently just as bad." They started laughing, horrible broken laughter that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with surviving something that should have killed them. Around them, the Vale townhouse burned. Generations of family legacy, expensive furniture, priceless artwork, all of it going up in flames while reporters scribbled frantically and sketch artists captured the destruction. "Well," Eleanor said, watching smoke pour from shattered windows, "I suppose that solves the problem of dividing assets." Adrian's laughter turned to something that might have been crying. "Everything's gone." "Not everything." Eleanor looked at the staff gathered in shaking groups, at Margaret wrapping blankets around the rescued maids, at Thomas organizing them with military efficiency despite his trembling hands. "Everyone made it out. Because you ran into a burning building. Because we both did." The fire brigade was getting the blaze under control, but the damage was catastrophic. The east wing was destroyed, the main house heavily damaged, years of repairs ahead, if the structure was even salvageable. A reporter broke through the brigade's perimeter, notebook raised. "Duchess Vale, is it true this fire was set in retaliation for your accusations against the Duke?" Eleanor stared at him. "What?" "Witnesses say the torch came from the crowd, someone shouting about defending the Duke's honor." Adrian lunged to his feet, fury replacing exhaustion. "Get away from her, all of you, back!" But more reporters were pushing forward now, smelling a bigger story. Scandal plus fire equaled newspapers sold for weeks. "Did you set this fire yourself for attention? Is it true you're having an affair as well? Where will you live now that your home is destroyed?" The questions came like blows. Eleanor tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Adrian positioned himself between her and the crowd, but there were too many of them. A carriage pushed through the mob. The door opened, and Lillian Hart stepped out, her face set with determination. "That's her," someone shouted. "The mistress!" Lillian ignored them, walked straight to Eleanor and Adrian. "Get in, both of you, now." "We can't just," Adrian started. "Your house is burning. You're surrounded by vultures. Get in!" Something in her voice cut through the chaos. Adrian helped Eleanor up, and they climbed into the carriage with Lillian. The driver whipped the horses forward, scattering the crowd. Through the back window, Eleanor watched the Vale townhouse recede into smoke and darkness, flames still licking at what remained. 5 years of marriage, generations of family history, gone in a single night. "Where are we going?" Adrian asked. Lillian looked between them, her face pale but resolute. "My studio. It's small and cramped and nothing like what you're used to. But it's safe. And right now, that's all that matters." Eleanor met her eyes. This woman who'd been part of their destruction now offering sanctuary, and didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Instead, she leaned back against the carriage seat and closed her eyes, every muscle screaming with exhaustion, and let herself be carried toward whatever came next. Behind them, London burned with their scandal. Ahead, 3 people who'd broken each other rode toward an uncertain future in a painter's cramped studio. And Eleanor discovered that rock bottom, when you finally hit it, felt almost like freedom. The studio smelled like turpentine and damp plaster. Eleanor sat on Lillian's threadbare sofa, wrapped in a borrowed blanket that scratched against her soot-covered skin, and tried to process the fact that she was in her husband's mistress's home while their house burned half a mile away. Adrian stood by the window, staring out at the dark street. Lillian moved through the cramped space, lighting candles, her movements efficient and careful. "There's a washroom down the hall," Lillian said, not looking at either of them. "Shared with the other tenants, but it should be empty this time of night. You'll want to clean the smoke off before it sets into your skin." Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were black with soot, trembling slightly from adrenaline crash. "Thank you. I'll put water on for tea. It's not much, but why are you helping us?" Adrian turned from the window, his face haggard in the candlelight. "After everything, why?" Lillian set down the kettle harder than necessary. "Because watching your house burn while reporters threw questions at you like stones made me sick. Because no one deserves that, not even people who've made a mess of their lives." She paused. "And because despite everything, I don't actually hate either of you. I just hate what we've all done to each other." The honesty of it cut through the tension. Eleanor found herself laughing. a single broken sound that didn't quite make it past her throat. "We're quite the tragedy, aren't we?" Eleanor said. "The Duke, the Duchess, and the painter? It's almost Shakespearean." "Except no one dies at the end," Lillian said. "Just everything we thought we knew about ourselves." Adrian moved away from the window, sank into the chair across from Eleanor. For the first time in 5 years, she really looked at him. Not the Duke, not the husband, just the man. He looked exhausted, lost, human in a way she'd forgotten he could be. "I need to check on the staff," he said quietly. "Make sure they have somewhere to stay. Margaret, Thomas, all of them." "Thomas will handle it," Eleanor interrupted. "He's more competent than both of us combined. They'll be at the servants' shelter or placed with other households by morning. Still, Adrian, you can't fix this tonight. The house is gone. Our reputation is ashes. Sit down and accept that for once in your life, you're not in control." He flinched at that, but didn't argue. Just sat there looking at his soot-stained hands like they belonged to someone else. Lillian returned with 3 chipped cups of tea. They drank in silence, the awkwardness of their situation settling around them like fog. "I have one bed," Lillian said finally. "Eleanor should take it. Adrian, there's the sofa. I'll take the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor said. "This is your home. We're the intruders." "You're refugees. There's a difference." Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion was winning. Every muscle ached. Her lungs still burned from smoke. The thought of walking anywhere, even to a shared washroom, felt impossible. "Just for tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out something else." Lillian nodded, gathered some paint-stained blankets from a trunk, and began making a nest on the floor near the easel. Adrian moved to help her, but she waved him off. "I've got it. You look like you're about to collapse." He did. They all did. Eleanor excused herself to the washroom, scrubbed soot from her skin with harsh soap and cold water, and tried not to think about the fact that everything she owned, every gown, every piece of jewelry, every letter and keepsake from her entire life, was either burned or being pawed through by strangers. She was a duchess with nothing. A wife in name only. A woman who destroyed her life in spectacular fashion and now slept in her husband's mistress's bed. The absurdity of it should have been funny. Instead, it just felt inevitable. When she returned to the studio, Adrian was already asleep on the sofa, one arm thrown over his eyes. Lillian sat by the window, sketching something by candlelight. "You don't have to stay awake," Eleanor said. "Can't sleep yet. Too wound up." Lillian didn't look up from her sketch. "You should rest, though. You look dead on your feet." Eleanor moved to the bed, just a narrow mattress on a wooden frame, nothing like the 4-poster monstrosity at the townhouse. She lay down fully dressed, too tired to care about propriety. "Lillian?" "Thank you. For this? You didn't have to." Lillian's pencil paused. "Maybe not, but it felt like the only decent thing left to do." Eleanor closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. She woke to weak morning light and voices arguing in harsh whispers. "Can't just stay here indefinitely," Adrian was saying. "I'm not suggesting indefinitely, but where else do you plan to go? Back to the burning house? A hotel where every reporter in London will find you?" "We'll figure something out." "When? After the scandal dies down?" "That'll be never, Adrian. This isn't going away." Eleanor sat up, every muscle protesting. Adrian and Lillian stood by the window, both looking like they hadn't slept much. On the small table between them sat a newspaper. "What time is it?" Eleanor asked. They both turned, guilt written across their faces. 8, Lillian said. "I tried to keep quiet, but let me guess. More headlines?" Adrian picked up the paper, hesitated, then handed it to her. "Vale Mansion burns as Duchess flees with mistress." Below the headline, an illustration showed 3 figures climbing into a carriage while flames consumed a building behind them. The artist had captured Eleanor's face with disturbing accuracy, wild-eyed, desperate, clinging to Lillian's arm. Eleanor read the article with growing numbness. It claimed she'd orchestrated the fire herself as revenge. That Adrian had been seen leaving Lillian's studio the previous evening. He hadn't, but facts didn't matter. That the 3 of them were engaged in some kind of scandalous arrangement too shocking to describe in a family publication. "It's all lies," Adrian said. "Of course it is. But true scandal is boring. They need theater." Eleanor set the paper aside. "What else?" Lillian pulled out 3 more papers, each worse than the last. One suggested Eleanor had lost her mind. Another claimed Adrian was bankrupt and the fire was insurance fraud. A third hinted darkly at unnatural arrangements between all 3 of them. "So we're ruined completely now," Eleanor said. "Not just damaged, actually destroyed." "There has to be a way to fix this," Adrian insisted. "A statement to the press. Legal action for slander. You can't sue every newspaper in London." Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, her face grim. "And statements from you right now will just be more fuel. They've decided who you are. Nothing you say will change that." Eleanor looked at her husband, at the woman he'd sought comfort with, at the tiny studio that was now their sanctuary and prison both. 3 people who'd never meant to be in the same room, now trapped together by circumstance and scandal. A laugh bubbled up in her chest, real laughter this time, edged with something that might have been hysteria. "What's funny?" Adrian demanded. "All of it. We spent 5 years hiding the truth, and now that everyone knows, we're hiding from the truth they've invented. It's perfect, really. Poetic." "Eleanor, no, listen. They want scandal, they want theater. We gave them exactly what they wanted, and now we're cowering like we did something wrong." "We did do something wrong," Lillian said quietly. "All of us. Yes. But what we did wrong, and what they think we did, are completely different things." Eleanor stood, paced the small space. An idea was forming, reckless and possibly insane, but better than hiding. "What if we stopped hiding?" "What do you mean?" Adrian asked. "I mean, what if we told the actual truth? Not the version they've invented, not some sanitized statement through lawyers, the real, ugly, complicated truth about what happened." "They'll destroy us even more thoroughly," Lillian said. "Will they? Or will they get bored once we stop being mysterious?" Eleanor turned to face them both. "Right now we're a scandalous puzzle. But if we lay out all the pieces, the loveless marriage, the desperate escape, the woman who tried to help us both, what's left to speculate about?" Adrian shook his head. "No one will believe us. Maybe not. But at least it'll be our truth, not theirs. And maybe, just maybe, some people will recognize themselves in it. All those other couples performing perfect marriages while dying inside. All those other people trapped by expectations they never chose. It's social suicide," Adrian said. "We're already dead socially. This way, at least we die on our own terms." Lillian looked between them, something shifting in her expression. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. I'm tired of lying, tired of performing, tired of letting other people write my story." Eleanor met Lillian's eyes. "You said yesterday I was brave at the gala. I wasn't. I was just broken. But this could actually be brave." Silence filled the studio. Outside, London was waking up, cartwheels on cobblestones, vendors calling their wares, the ordinary sounds of a city that would gossip about them over breakfast. "How would it work?" Adrian asked finally. "We find a reporter. Not one of the scandal sheets, someone with actual integrity. We give them an interview, all 3 of us together. We tell them everything." "Everything?" Lillian's voice was skeptical. "Everything that matters. The arranged marriage, the slow death of pretending, the affair that wasn't really an affair, the fire we didn't set. All of it." Adrian moved to the window, stared out at the street. "My mother will disown me. My friends will abandon me. The business contracts are already in jeopardy after last night," Eleanor interrupted. "Adrian, we've lost everything we were trying to protect. The only thing left is our ability to be honest about it." He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd thrown champagne in his face, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I don't know if I'm brave enough." "None of us do, but maybe that's the point." Lillian stood, moved to her desk, and pulled out a worn address book. "I know someone, a writer for The Independent. He's done pieces on social reform, women's rights, that sort of thing. If anyone would give you a fair hearing, it's him." "You'd help us do this?" Eleanor asked. "I'm already part of this mess. Might as well try to shape it into something true." Lillian found the page she was looking for. "His name is James Whitmore, lives in Bloomsbury. I can send word today." Eleanor looked at Adrian. He looked back, and something passed between them. Not love, maybe not even friendship, but understanding. They'd failed at marriage, but maybe they could succeed at this, at being honest about the failure. "Do it," Adrian said. Lillian nodded and left to send the message. Eleanor and Adrian stood in the studio's morning light, separated by 5 feet that felt like 5 miles. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "No, but I'm sure about not lying anymore. That's enough." "Eleanor," he stopped, started again. "I am sorry for all of it. Not for leaving, but for how I left. For making you feel like it was your fault when it was mine. It was both of ours. We just made different mistakes. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever love me? Even a little?" The question hung between them, heavy with 5 years of never asking. Eleanor thought about it, really thought, looking past the anger and hurt to those early months. The careful conversations, the gentle way he'd helped her navigate society politics, the morning he'd stayed with her through her first migraine, reading aloud to distract her from pain. "I think I loved who you were trying to be," she said finally, "and maybe you loved who I was pretending to be. But we never got to know who we actually were. Too busy performing." He nodded slowly. "I think I'd like to know who you actually are, if that's allowed." "I don't even know yet, but maybe we'll both figure it out." Lillian returned half an hour later with news that James Whitmore would meet them that afternoon at his office. She told him only that the Duke and Duchess Vale wished to give a statement regarding recent events. He'd agreed immediately. The three of them spent the morning preparing. Lillian found clean clothes for Eleanor, a simple gray dress that fit reasonably well. Adrian borrowed a shirt from Lillian's neighbor, a carpenter who was roughly his size. They looked like different people in these ordinary clothes. Less like nobility, more like humans. At 2 o'clock, they walked through London together, Duke, Duchess, and Painter, an impossible trio drawing stares from everyone they passed. Eleanor kept her head high, refused to show the fear churning in her stomach. James Whitmore's office was above a bookshop in a neighborhood Eleanor had never visited. He met them at the door, a man in his 40s with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes that assessed them without judgment. "Duke Vale, Duchess Vale, Miss Hart. Please, come in." The office was cramped but organized, every surface covered with papers and books. Whitmore gestured to chairs arranged around a small table. "I'll be honest," he said as they settled. "I expected your lawyers to contact me. Not you personally." "We're done with lawyers," Eleanor said. "We want to tell the truth, all of it. Will you print it?" Whitmore pulled out a notebook. "Depends on the truth. Start at the beginning." So they did. Adrian talked about the arranged marriage, the pressure to produce an heir, the slow realization that duty and love weren't the same thing. Eleanor spoke about the loneliness, the performance, the way she'd lost herself trying to be what everyone expected. Lillian explained how she'd met Adrian, how their friendship had remained innocent even as it served as escape from his marriage. They talked for hours. Whitmore asked hard questions about the affair, about Eleanor's public accusation, about the fire. They answered everything honestly, even when the answers made them look bad. "Why now?" Whitmore asked finally. "Why tell this story when it will only make the scandal worse?" Eleanor glanced at Adrian, at Lillian, at these two people she'd never expected to sit beside. "Because living through lies destroyed us," she said, "and maybe if we're honest about that destruction, it'll help someone else who's suffocating in their own perfect marriage. Maybe some other duchess will read this and realize she doesn't have to keep pretending. Maybe some other duke will find the courage to admit he's unhappy before he destroys someone trying to be happy for him. And if society ostracizes you completely, if you lose everything, we already have," Adrian said quietly. "The house, the reputation, the illusion, it's all gone. The only thing left is our ability to be honest about why." Whitmore set down his pen, looked at each of them in turn. "This will be the most controversial piece I've ever written. My editor might not even run it." "But if they do?" Eleanor pressed. "If they do, it'll change the conversation. Not overnight, not completely. But it'll give people a different lens to view your scandal. Instead of villains and victims, you'll be 3 complicated people who made complicated choices." "That's all we want," Lillian said. "To be seen as human instead of characters in a morality play." Whitmore nodded slowly. "I'll write it. Can't guarantee when it'll run, but I'll write it." They left the office as the sun was setting, the winter sky streaked with orange and purple. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. Maybe years. "What now?" Adrian asked. "Now we wait. Eleanor said, and figure out what comes after honesty. They returned to Lillian's studio to find Margaret waiting outside, looking harried and determined. Your Grace, she hurried forward. I've been searching for you all day. Thomas told me where you might be, but I wasn't certain. Margaret, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, ma'am. Everything's, well, it's strange. Margaret pulled an envelope from her bag. This arrived at the servants' shelter this morning. It's from Lady Catherine Winters. Eleanor opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a short note in Catherine's elegant handwriting. Eleanor, I've spent the night thinking about what you said at the gala, about dying inside a perfect marriage. You were braver than I've ever been. I'm hosting a small gathering tomorrow at 3. Just a few women who understand what you meant. We'd like you to come. If you're willing. Catherine. Below it, a dozen names. Eleanor recognized them all. Duchesses, countesses, ladies of the highest ranks, women who'd sat silent while she was mocked and condemned. What is it? Adrian asked. Eleanor handed him the note, too stunned to speak. They want to see you? Adrian's voice held disbelief. After everything? Not see me. Understand me. Eleanor looked up at the studio window, at the light flickering inside where Lillian waited. They want to talk about the thing we're not supposed to talk about, being unhappy in marriages we're supposed to be grateful for. That's dangerous for them, Lillian said, reading over Adrian's shoulder. It's dangerous for all of us. But maybe that's the point. Eleanor thought about Catherine's note, about James Whitmore's questions, about the three of them standing in a journalist's office telling uncomfortable truths. Something was shifting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but shifting nonetheless. I'll go, Eleanor said. Tomorrow, to Catherine's gathering. I'll come with you, Adrian offered. No, this is something I need to do myself. He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. All right. They returned to the studio, divided up the meager food Lillian had, and spent the evening in something almost like companionship. Not friendship yet, that would take time, but the beginning of understanding. The next afternoon, Eleanor borrowed another of Lillian's dresses and walked to Catherine's townhouse alone. The gathering was small, 12 women in a sitting room, tea and cakes on elegant china, the kind of refined afternoon Eleanor had attended hundreds of times. But the atmosphere was different, charged. Catherine stood when Eleanor entered. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. We wouldn't have blamed you after how we treated you. Catherine gestured to the other women. We've all been talking about what you said at the gala, about marriages that look perfect but feel like dying. Lady Ashford spoke up, her usual haughtiness replaced with something raw. My husband hasn't touched me in 3 years, won't even sleep in the same room. But we smile at parties, and everyone thinks we're devoted. Another woman, a young countess whose name Eleanor couldn't remember. Mine keeps a mistress in Paris, everyone knows. I'm just supposed to ignore it and produce heirs. One by one, they shared their truths. Loveless marriages, emotional neglect, the suffocating pressure to maintain perfect facades while crumbling inside. Eleanor listened, stunned. All these women she'd envied, women she'd thought had everything, were drowning in the same lies she'd been. Why now? Eleanor asked. Why tell me this now? Catherine met her eyes. Because you showed us it was possible to stop pretending. It cost you everything, but you did it anyway. And that made us realize maybe the cost of pretending forever is even higher. I don't know if what I did was right, Eleanor admitted. I destroyed my life, my husband's life, hurt people who didn't deserve it. But you're still breathing, Lady Ashford said quietly. You're still you. That's more than most of us can say. The gathering lasted for hours. They talked about the impossibility of divorce, the financial dependence that trapped them, the social consequences of honesty. No one had easy answers, but for the first time, they were asking the questions out loud. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Catherine caught her arm. Whatever happens next, you're not alone. Some of us may not be brave enough to follow your example, but we understand why you did it. And we'll remember that someone had the courage to stop performing. Eleanor walked back to Lillian's studio through darkening streets, Catherine's words echoing in her mind. When she arrived, she found Adrian and Lillian sitting at the small table, both looking grim. What happened? Eleanor asked. Lillian held up a newspaper, not the Independent, but the Morning Chronicle, one of the scandal sheets. Vale Duchess claims loveless. Marriage, exclusive interview reveals shocking truth. Someone leaked it, Adrian said. Not Whitmore. He swears he hasn't even submitted his piece yet, but someone who heard about our meeting talked to the Chronicle. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What does it say? A twisted version of what we told Whitmore. They're saying you're blaming me for everything, that I drove you mad with neglect, that Lillian seduced me away from a loving wife. Adrian's voice was flat with defeat. It's all wrong. Eleanor read the article, watched their honest attempt at truth get mangled into more scandal, and felt despair creeping in. Then she noticed something. At the bottom of the article, a line in smaller print. Duchess Vale reportedly told friends she regrets nothing about exposing her husband's affair, claiming other noble wives deserve to know they aren't alone in unhappy marriages. Look at this, Eleanor said, pointing. Adrian and Lillian read it, confused. They got most of it wrong, Eleanor continued, but they got that part right. Other wives deserve to know they're not alone. And now, thanks to this awful article, thousands of women across England are reading about it over breakfast. That's a silver lining? Lillian asked skeptically. It's a crack in the wall. That's all we need. Over the next week, letters began arriving. At first just a few, slipped under the studio door or left with Lillian's neighbors. Then dozens, then hundreds. Letters from women in marriages like Eleanor's, from men suffocating under the same expectations as Adrian, from people who'd read the scandal and seen themselves in it. Thank you for saying what I've been thinking for 15 years. My husband and I haven't been happy in a decade. Your courage makes me think we might survive admitting it. I thought I was the only one pretending. Now I know I'm not alone. They read them together, Eleanor, Adrian, and Lillian, in the cramped studio that had become their unlikely headquarters. Each letter was a small act of rebellion against the lie that perfect marriages existed. Finally, 3 weeks after the gala, James Whitmore's article ran in The Independent, The Truth About the Vale Scandal, a conversation about marriage, expectation, and the cost of honesty. He'd written it exactly as they'd told it. No villains, no heroes, just 3 flawed people trying to survive impossible expectations. He'd included quotes from each of them, given context to their choices, and ended with a question. How many other marriages in our highest circles are similarly hollow? And more importantly, why do we demand the performance continue even when it destroys the performers? The response was immediate and divided. Conservative papers called it dangerous propaganda. Progressive ones praised it as necessary conversation. Society matrons declared it an attack on marriage itself. Younger women passed it around drawing rooms like contraband. But the conversation had started. That was what mattered. Eleanor sat in Lillian's studio reading letters from strangers who'd found hope in her honesty and realized something had fundamentally changed. She'd stopped being a duchess performing perfection and become a woman surviving truth. It wasn't victory yet. The divorce proceedings were still messy, money was tight, society still whispered. But for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor could breathe without feeling like the air was poisoned with lies. She looked up to find Adrian and Lillian watching her, both wearing similar expressions of cautious hope. We did it, she said. We actually changed the conversation. The first step anyway, Adrian corrected. But he was smiling, a real smile, not the rehearsed one he'd worn for years. Outside, London continued its gossip and scandal. But inside the cramped studio, 3 people who'd broken each other were slowly learning to build something honest from the wreckage. And that felt like winning. The letters kept coming. By the end of March, they'd received over 3,000, stacks of them piled in corners of Lillian's studio, testimony to how many people had been waiting for someone to say the quiet part out loud. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting them into categories. Supportive, angry, desperately lonely. Some were addressed to her, some to Adrian, a surprising number to all 3 of them together. Listen to this one, she said, unfolding a letter written on expensive stationery. Dear Duchess Vale, my mother says you're a disgrace, but I'm 19 and about to be married to a man I barely know, and reading about your courage made me realize I have choices. I called off the engagement yesterday. My mother won't speak to me, but I can breathe for the first time in months. Thank you. Eleanor looked up. She's 19. We might have saved her from 5 years of what we went through. Adrian glanced up from the legal documents he'd been reviewing. The divorce papers sat between them like a ceasefire agreement. Painful, but necessary. One person at a time, I suppose. It's more than we had a month ago. Lillian emerged from behind her easel, wiping paint from her hands. She'd been working on a new piece, something abstract and violent with slashes of red and black. Cathartic, she'd called it. Honest. There's someone at the door, she said. Looks official. Eleanor's stomach tightened. They'd had visits from reporters, angry society matrons, even a constable investigating the fire. Each knock brought new anxiety. Adrian opened the door to reveal a man in a dark suit carrying a leather satchel. Duke Vale. I'm Harold Brennan, from Brennan and Associates. May I come in? Depends. What kind of associates? Legal. But not the kind you're thinking. Brennan stepped inside without waiting for permission, surveyed the cramped studio with barely concealed surprise. I represent a consortium of investors interested in a rather unusual proposal. We're not interested in investments, Adrian said flatly. Not even ones that could restore your fortune and give you actual purpose? That got their attention. Brennan set his satchel on Lillian's work table, pulled out a folder of documents. I'll be direct. Your interview with the Independent started conversations in circles beyond your usual society. Reform circles, women's rights advocates, people who've been arguing for marriage law changes for decades. He laid out the first document. They want to establish a foundation, a place where people in unhappy marriages can seek counsel, legal aid, financial support for separation. They want to call it the Vale Initiative. Eleanor stared at him. You're joking. I assure you I'm not. They've raised £30,000 in pledges. They want you both to be involved, public faces of the movement, so to speak. Duchess Vale specifically, given your first-hand experience. This is absurd, Adrian said. We're pariahs. Why would anyone want us as the face of anything? Because you're honest pariahs. That's more valuable than respectable liars. Brennan pulled out more papers. The foundation would provide legal counsel for divorce proceedings, emergency housing for women fleeing marriages, education programs about financial independence. All the things you needed and didn't have. Eleanor's hands shook as she looked through the documents. It was real. Organizational bylaws, donor lists, proposed locations for offices. Someone had been planning this while she'd been drowning in scandal. Who's behind this, she asked. A coalition, some of the women from Lady Catherine's gathering, several progressive members of Parliament, a few wealthy widows who've been funding suffrage work. They read your story and saw opportunity. Lillian moved closer, reading over Eleanor's shoulder. This is extraordinary. It's also risky, Brennan said. You'll be even more controversial than you already are. Conservatives will call you marriage destroyers. Churches will condemn you. You'll be making enemies of powerful people. As opposed to now, when we're so beloved? Eleanor's laugh was sharp. We're already destroyed, Mr. Brennan. At least this way the destruction means something. Adrian was quiet, studying the papers with his business face on, the one Eleanor recognized from meetings about investments and contracts. What's the financial arrangement? You'd be paid board members. Not a fortune, but enough to live on independently. The foundation would also fund rebuilding a portion of your estate for use as the first refuge house. The estate that burned down. The structure's salvageable. Expensive to repair, but salvageable. The foundation would cover costs in exchange for permanent use of the East Wing. Eleanor looked at Adrian. He looked back, and she saw the same wild hope she felt reflected in his eyes. A way forward, a way to make their catastrophe mean something. We'll need to discuss this, Adrian said. Of course. I'll return in 3 days for your answer. Brennan packed up his documents. For what it's worth, I think you'd be good at this. You've lived what these people are going through. That's worth more than any law degree. After he left, the three of them sat in stunned silence. It's too good to be true, Lillian said finally. Probably, Eleanor agreed. But what if it isn't? Adrian stood, paced the small space. The divorce proceedings would become even more public. Every detail of our failure examined and documented. Are you prepared for that? Are you? He stopped, met her eyes. I think I have to be. Not just for us, but for everyone who wrote those letters. They deserve better than we had. Eleanor stood, moved to the window overlooking the narrow street. Below, ordinary people went about ordinary lives. A woman carrying laundry, a man selling newspapers, children playing some complicated game with sticks and stones. Normal life, something she'd never really had. I want to do it, she said. Not because it'll fix us or make us respectable again, but because maybe we can prevent someone else from spending 5 years dying quietly in a marriage they're too afraid to leave. Then we do it, Adrian said. Together. One last performance, except this time we're performing honesty instead of perfection. Lillian cleared her throat. You know I can't be part of this. The foundation needs legitimacy. A painter who enabled an affair isn't exactly the image they're going for. Lillian, no, it's fine. Actually, it's better than fine. She gestured to the painting she'd been working on. I've been hiding too, in my own way. Using art as escape instead of expression. Maybe it's time I stopped that. What will you do? Eleanor asked. Paint. Really paint, not just pretty landscapes for gallery openings. Show the messy truth instead of comfortable lies. Lillian smiled. You're not the only ones who can be brave. They gave Brennan their answer 3 days later. Yes to the foundation. Yes to becoming public advocates for marriage reform. Yes to turning their scandal into something useful. The work began immediately. Board meetings with lawyers and reformers who treated Eleanor like a colleague instead of a cautionary tale. Site visits to the burned estate where architects discussed rebuilding plans. Interviews with newspapers that actually wanted to understand instead of sensationalize. It was exhausting. Eleanor had traded one performance for another. Instead of perfect duchess, she was now courageous reformer. But this role fit better, felt more true. The divorce finalized in June. A quiet proceeding in a judge's chambers, legal dissolution of a marriage that had been dead for years. Eleanor walked out of the courthouse a divorced woman, socially ruined but legally free. Adrian met her outside, looking similarly unmoored. How do you feel? He asked. Terrified. Relieved. Both. Eleanor looked at the divorce decree in her hands. We're not married anymore. No, we're not. They stood on the courthouse steps, two people who'd once pledged their lives to each other, now released from vows neither had been able to keep. I don't regret it, Adrian said suddenly. Marrying you, I mean. I regret how it went, what we did to each other. But not the fact of it. Does that make sense? Eleanor thought about it, about the woman she'd been at 19, terrified and eager to please, and the woman she was now at 24, scarred but solid. It makes sense. I'm not who I would have been without you. Better or worse, I don't know. But different. More real. Friends? He extended his hand awkwardly. Eleanor looked at his hand, then at his face. This man who'd been husband, stranger, collaborator, and now something undefined. She took his hand. Friends, she agreed. Eventually, right now, maybe just allies. I'll take it. The foundation opened its doors in September. The east wing of the Vale estate had been transformed from aristocratic guest quarters into practical refuge. Small private rooms, a communal kitchen, a library stocked with legal texts and employment guides. Eleanor had insisted on comfortable furniture over expensive decoration. These would be homes for women fleeing, not showpieces. The opening day brought protesters, conservative groups with signs declaring them marriage destroyers, religious leaders condemning their work as ungodly. Eleanor stood on the front steps with Adrian and the other board members and weathered the anger with her head high. How do you respond to accusations that you're encouraging women to abandon their marriages? A reporter shouted. Eleanor looked at the protesters, at their fury and fear of change, and felt something settle inside her. I'm encouraging women to survive them, she said clearly. There's a difference between abandonment and self-preservation. If your marriage is killing you, emotionally, spiritually, sometimes physically, you have the right to leave. That shouldn't be controversial. That should be obvious. But the sanctity of marriage is a lie we tell to justify trapping people in situations that destroy them. My marriage looked sacred from the outside. Inside, it was suffocating us both. She gestured to Adrian. We made each other miserable trying to be what everyone expected instead of what we actually were. The foundation exists so other people don't have to repeat our mistakes. The reporter scribbled frantically. Eleanor didn't care anymore what they'd write. She'd said the truth. That was enough. That night, after the protesters left and the first residents moved into the refuge, Eleanor sat in the small office she'd claimed as headquarters. The desk was covered with intake forms, legal documents, letters from women asking for help. A knock at the door. Catherine Winters entered, looking uncomfortable in the practical space. "I came to see it," Catherine said. "The refuge, what you built." "What we built. Your donations made this possible." "My money, maybe, but your courage." Catherine moved to the window overlooking the grounds. "I'm leaving him. Lord Winters, I wanted you to know." Eleanor's breath caught. "Catherine, don't! Don't try to talk me out of it or warn me about consequences. I know what I'm doing." Catherine turned, and her face was set with determination Eleanor recognized from the mirror. 20 years I've been unhappy. 20 years of pretending. I read your interview and thought, if she can survive the truth, maybe I can too. It's not easy. Nothing worth doing is. Catherine pulled an envelope from her bag. "I'm pledging another £10,000 to the foundation. And I'm moving into the refuge next week while my lawyers handle the separation. I want to be here, to help others do what I should have done years ago." Eleanor came around the desk, took Catherine's hands. They were shaking. "You'll lose everything," Eleanor said. "I already have. I just stopped pretending I hadn't." Catherine squeezed back. "Besides, I hear there's a position open for a second coordinator, if you'll have me. Can you handle angry protesters and legal paperwork and women who've lost everything showing up at 3 in the morning?" "Can you?" Eleanor laughed. "I don't know, but I'm trying." "Then we'll try together." Over the next year, the foundation expanded. A second refuge house opened in Manchester, a third in Edinburgh. They hired lawyers who specialized in divorce proceedings, counselors who understood trauma, employment agents who helped women find work. Eleanor threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once devoted to being a perfect duchess. Except now, when she smiled at events, it was real. When she spoke to donors, she believed what she was saying. When she came home exhausted, it was from meaningful work instead of meaningless performance. Adrian found his own path. He took the Liverpool shipyard contract, the one he'd been negotiating during their marriage, and used the profits to fund training programs for women entering trades. Became known as the Duke who hired female apprentices, who paid fair wages, who believed competence mattered more than gender. They saw each other at board meetings, occasionally for dinners where they discussed foundation business, and discovered they liked each other better divorced than they ever had married. The friendship Eleanor had promised took root slowly, built on honesty instead of obligation. Lillian's career exploded after a controversial gallery show featuring paintings about marriage, adultery, and emotional survival. Critics called her work brutally honest and uncomfortably intimate. She sold everything within a week and used the money to open a studio space for women artists who'd been rejected by traditional galleries. The three of them remained connected, not as scandal partners, but as people who'd survived something terrible and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. 2 years after the Winter Gala, Eleanor stood in front of Parliament testifying about proposed marriage law reforms. The chamber was packed, supporters and opponents both watching to see if a divorced duchess could hold her ground. "The current laws treat women as property," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We cannot own property, cannot divorce without proving adultery or extreme cruelty, cannot keep our own children if our husbands object. These aren't protections. They're chains." A conservative member interrupted. "But you benefited from marriage, Duchess. Your family's debts were paid. You lived in luxury. I lived in a cage. A gilded cage, certainly, but a cage nonetheless." Eleanor met his eyes directly. "And I was one of the lucky ones. I had resources, education, connections. Most women have none of those. They're trapped in marriages with no escape, no support, no hope. That's what we're trying to change. By destroying the institution of marriage. By saving the people inside failing ones." The debate raged for hours. Eleanor answered questions, weathered accusations, presented statistics compiled by the foundation. When the vote came, the reforms passed by a narrow margin. Not everything they'd wanted, but enough to make a difference. Eleanor walked out of Parliament to find a crowd waiting. Some were protesters. Others were women holding signs thanking her. Some crying, all of them representing the thousands who'd been waiting for someone to fight this fight. Adrian was waiting at the bottom of the steps, pride evident on his face. "You did it," he said. "We did it. The foundation, the testimony, all of it. No, you did that. I just helped." He smiled. "The divorce was the best decision we ever made as a married couple." Eleanor laughed because it was true. They'd been terrible at marriage, but they were good at this. At honesty, at advocacy, at being imperfect people trying to do meaningful work. What now? Adrian asked. Eleanor looked at the crowd, at the women who'd found courage in her catastrophe, at the future unfolding messier and harder, but more honest than any perfect performance could have been. Now we keep going, she said. There are more laws to change, more women to help, more lies to dismantle. Sounds exhausting. It is, but it's real. And I'll take real over perfect any day. They walked back to the foundation headquarters together, former spouses and current allies, and Eleanor felt something she'd never experienced in the Vale mansion, belonging. Not to a role or a title or an expectation, but to a purpose she'd chosen herself. That night, Eleanor sat in her small flat, nothing like the estate, but hers in a way that mansion never was, and read through the latest letters. A woman in Cornwall asking about divorce proceedings. A man in Liverpool wondering if the foundation helped unhappy husbands too. A 19-year-old who'd read about Eleanor's testimony and decided to postpone her engagement. One letter made her pause. The handwriting was shaky, the paper cheap, but the words hit hard. Dear Duchess Vale, I've been married 43 years to a man who hasn't spoken a kind word to me in decades. I thought I had to endure until death. Then I read about your foundation. I'm 71 years old, and yesterday I filed for separation. My children think I'm mad. Maybe I am, but I'm also alive for the first time since I was 28. Thank you for showing me it's never too late for truth. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, added it to the collection she kept in a box labeled Why We Do This. She poured herself tea, looked around her modest flat with its secondhand furniture and paint-stained curtains courtesy of Lillian. No servants, no grand staircase, no cherubs on the ceiling to count during sleepless nights. Just a small space where Eleanor lived as herself, flawed, scarred, honest Eleanor who'd destroyed her perfect life and built a meaningful one from the ruins. Worth it. Every painful moment, every public humiliation, every loss. Absolutely worth it. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Catherine holding a bottle of wine and looking pleased with herself. The Manchester Refuge just got its 20th resident, Catherine announced, and I have news about the Scotland expansion. Come in, tell me everything. They settled at Eleanor's small table, spreading papers between them while they planned and argued and laughed. Two divorced women building a movement one refugee at a time. Later, much later, after Catherine left and London settled into quiet, Eleanor stood at her window looking out at the city. Somewhere in those streets were women in marriages like hers had been. Somewhere were men suffering the same way Adrian had. Somewhere were people trapped by expectations they never chose. But also, somewhere in those streets were the 3 refuges they'd opened, the lawyers who took cases pro bono, the women who'd found courage to leave, the lives changed by truth instead of performance. Eleanor had spent 5 years dying quietly. She'd destroyed everything in one spectacular night of honesty. And from those ashes, she'd built something that mattered more than any perfect marriage ever could. The scandal would follow her forever. The gossip would never fully stop. But Eleanor had learned something vital in the wreckage of her Duchess performance. She'd rather be honestly ruined than perfectly miserable. She turned from the window, back to her small flat and meaningful work, and the life she'd chosen instead of the one chosen for her. And for the first time since she was 19 years old, Eleanor felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not perfect, not undamaged, not what anyone expected, but real. Finally, unmistakably real. And that was enough. That was everything.